Hey guys, Chef Tom here. Today we're going to talk about yield percents and why you should care. Before I demonstrate to you what exactly yield percents are, I'm going to tell you why you should care about it. I'll do a quick overview of why you should care about it, and then later on in the video I'll go into further detail. Yield percents will help you know how much food you need to buy or how much you need to order. It'll help prevent under ordering and over ordering. You don't want to buy more food than you need, and you definitely want to buy enough food for what you need. Yield percents will help you out when you're trying to figure out how much a recipe will cost or how much you need to charge somebody for the food that you made for them. Knowing the yield percents will help prevent inaccuracies in recipe costs or any invoice that you might need to make for a customer. Or if you're just trying to budget out your food for, let's say, a family get together and you want to make sure you get the best bang for your buck and not buy too much of one thing or too little of another thing, knowing yield percents will help you order the correct amount of food for what you need. Knowing yield percents will help you be able to figure out how much food that you can get out of a particular amount of food that you currently have in your coolers or your refrigerator, how many servings you can get out of that. Say you know you have a particular quantity of a certain item, knowing the yield percent will help you figure out how far you can stretch that certain item. Knowing yield percents will help you maintain consistency by monitoring the levels of trim and waste that you're producing. And then all these things I'll go into further detail as we go along in this video. So today I'm going to make some apple pie, and in order to demonstrate what yield percent is, we're going to be talking about apples. I have these other ingredients here, but the apples will be playing the key role in what we're discussing. And this isn't a video about how to make apple pie. This is just a video of me using apple pie as an example. If you need to make apple pie for, say, 20 people, you're going to want to know how many apples you're going to need. Knowing the yield percent of apples will definitely play a key in knowing how many apples to buy. Now, apples are a cheap ingredient. In a further example, I'm going to use beef tenderloin, which is way more expensive. So basically how yield percents work is I bought these apples, but not all the parts of this apple is edible. Say we're going to peel the apples, we're going to core the apples, and then what we have left over, we'll have the edible portion and we'll have the trim, which is basically waste. I have 3 pounds and 3 ounces of apples here. This will be referred to as the as purchase weight or AP weight. Edible portion is also referred to as EP weight. And then you have the trim, which is basically just waste. All right, so we peeled and cored the apples. The final weight of the peeled edible portion apples is 2 pounds, 5.7 ounces. And then here is our trim, which is basically just trash. Sometimes you can use the trim for things like stalks, or you can repurpose them. For the example of these apples though, they're basically trash. So to figure out our yield percent, we're going to take the little number divided by the big number. So the little number is the number that we ended up with as our edible portion, which is 2 pounds, 5.8 ounces. I mean, that's basically 2.5 pounds divided by our starting weight, which was 3 pounds, 3.4 ounces. Let's just round that up to 4 ounces just to make it easier on ourselves math-wise. So that's like 3.25. So our yield percent is 76.9%. If you had a 1 there, it would be 100%. So a 1 would be 100%, but this is 0.769, which is basically 76.9%. We can round that up to 77%. Just for good measure. So yeah, that's how you figure out yield percent. Our yield percent for the apples was 77%. So most produce and meats will have a yield percent that's not 100, but you do have items that do have 100% yield, like flour, sugar, spices, like liquids, items that you buy that are pre-cleaned, pre-trimmed, just ready to go items. Those have 100% yield percents. It's the things that you need to break down into a more manageable form factor for you to cook with is the things that you'll need to know what the yield percent is. Now, apples are pretty cheap. A lot of people won't care about that, but when you get into more expensive items like meats, that's where it really starts to add up, and you could end up losing thousands of dollars a year or $100,000 even a year. Depends on how big your operation is and how expensive the products that you're using are. Now, it's good to know how to figure out the yield percents for yourself. Thankfully, you don't have to do that every time. There's resources out there where people have already done stuff like this. One of those resources is the Book of Yields. It's invaluable for people who are writing recipes or trying to cost out recipes or to determine how much they need to charge for their food that they're serving. This book has saved me a lot of time when I've been trying to figure out recipe costs. It has everything in here from grains, it has vegetables, fruits, herbs, spices, canned items, dry beans. It'll tell you how much dry rice you start off with, what the yield is on that, and other items with very similar concepts. Fats, oils. It'll tell you how much like 1 quart of oil weighs. So let's turn it open to apples. I'll give you kind of an example here. Right here it has apples listed as an 85% yield, which is 10% off of what we had, but that's the reason why you might want to do this stuff yourself, is to get a more accurate understanding what the yield percent is for the items that you have. Not every apple is the same size. There's many different varieties of apples. This is just kind of more of a quick reference that will save you a lot of time. This is kind of what it has here. The yield percent is 85%. If you start off with 1 pound of apple, you can expect to get 13.6 ounces when you're done. Apricots per se, if you start off with 1 pound of apples or apricots, you'll have 14.7. The yield percent is 91.9%. 1 cup of cleaned apricots will weigh 5.46 ounces, or you can have 2.69 cups per pound. So that's just an example of all the math that's already been done when looking at a book like this. So now I'm going to give an example that's of a more high price item. It's going to be beef tenderloin, which starts off as pismos, peeled side muscle on. You need to break it down and then portion it to get it into the filet mignon steak. It's a very common item in more fine dining restaurants. It's a very tender cut of meat. It's also a pretty expensive cut of meat. Depends on what the beef market's doing. It can be anywhere from $10 a pound for choice beef tenderloin to $15, $20. So say you're doing a party for 80 people and those people are getting 8-ounce beef tenderloin steaks. How do you know how much you need to order? That's where your yield percents come in. All right, so we're gonna do a party for 80 people. Let's see what we got going on here. 80 people times 8 ounces per person equals 640 ounces. So you're gonna need 640 ounces of steak. In order to figure out how many pounds we actually need out of those ounces, we'll divide that by 16. So we're gonna need 40 pounds to get 80 people 8 ounces of steak. But hold on a minute, we're not gonna be able to use 100% of that meat that we bought because we have to break it down and clean it. What's the yield percent of steak? The yield percent of beef tenderloin, it's typically 75%. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna divide that by 0.75, which means that we need to buy 53 pounds of pismos, unclean beef tenderloin, in order to get enough meat to get 40 pounds of clean weight in order to get 80 8-ounce steaks. I would go ahead and bump that up by a little bit because you're not gonna get clean portions out of each one of those. So like I would probably bump that up to 56 pounds. You won't be under ordering and you won't be over ordering. It's better to over order than it is to under order because at least you'll have enough to serve the people that you need to serve. And then if you have any leftover, you can freeze it or something like that. Let's say you made a mistake and you only ordered 40 pounds of steaks because you thought that's what you need and you didn't take yield percents into a factor with that. You can do the math there and determine that you'll still be able to get 80 portions out of that, but you're gonna have to turn it down into 6-ounce portions, which is still a decent amount. Most people eat 6 to 8 ounces of meat, typically at one sitting. 6 ounces is typically fine for most people. 8 ounces is kind of on the heavier end. That's 6 to 8 ounces before cooking, by the way. That's how most meat is measured, is before the cook weight. So that's the reason why you should care, is because you need to know how much you need to order, and then also knowing how to figure out if you under ordered, how many portions you can actually get out of that amount that you have. So another reason why you should care is maintaining consistency. So it can help you monitor your efficiency with cleaning, like say the beef tenderloin. Say you have a staff member who's been cleaning beef tenderloin, you decide to monitor their yield percents. You weighed their meat before they trimmed it, and then they trimmed it, and they have their clean meat here, and they have their trim here, and you do the math and their yield percent is 65%. If they're only getting a 65% yield, then they're trimming way too much. In that instance, I would teach them and coach them into how to get the yield percent that you want. Typically with beef tenderloin, there's one side where there's marbling on one side of the beef tenderloin where some people will try to clean that up too much. If you try to clean up too much, you're just gonna shave away all the meat. So just knowing that and coaching your staff on how much is too much. So why does that matter? Well, it matters, one, because you were expecting to get 40 pounds out of that 53 pounds that you ordered, and if you don't get 40 pounds, then you're not going to have enough steaks because it wasn't what you were expecting it to be. Number two, if you're trimming too much, then you're basically throwing money in the trash. So let's say that Pismos costs $15 a pound wholesale, which isn't unreasonable. So at $15 a pound, 55 pounds is $825. That $15 a pound is what is referred to as purchase cost, or APC. So if you bought 55 pounds of Pismos and your yield percent is 75%, you're gonna end up with 41.25 pounds of clean beef tenderloin. Say you have that same 55 pound case of Pismos and your yield percent is 65%, you would end up with 35.75 pounds of clean beef tenderloin, which is basically 5.5 pounds of steaks that you lost. If you take that original as purchase cost of $15 to that 5.5 pounds of steaks that you lost, that's gonna be $82.50. But hold on a second, it's actually $110 of steaks lost, because what we need to take into account is the edible portion cost. And this is where recipe costing really comes in. So you bought that case at $825. You need to sell that steak for $825 just to break even. What you had over here is clean meat, and what you had over here is trim. So you can basically think of the trim as waste. I mean, you could use it for like hamburgers or something like that, grind it up. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the trim is going to be waste. You need to sell that same amount for $825. If you sold those steaks for $15 per pound, you would be losing 25%, and you'd be 25% under what you needed for the $825. You would be losing 25% of your money. So you need to adjust the price per pound to reflect the yield percent. So to figure out your edible portion cost, you're going to take that $15 of your purchase cost per pound, and you're going to divide that by the 75% of the yield percent, and that's going to equal $20. $20 per pound. So $20 per pound is basically what those steaks now cost you. And you need to sell it for $20 per pound just to break even. Clearly you don't want to just break even when you're producing food for people. That would be a business that would not be worth it. You wouldn't be able to pay your employees, you wouldn't be able to pay rent. So you need to obviously charge more than that, but that's a discussion for a whole nother video. $20 per pound you need to sell those steaks for just to break even. So that's why it's important to know what yield percents are and how they can affect you. If you are selling really expensive meats and stuff, I mean, it's most important for that. It really adds up over time. Could add up to thousands, to tens of thousands, to hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. As far as, like, you know, vegetables and onions and stuff, you'll need to, yield percent figures into all that stuff too, but that stuff's a lot cheaper. So I mean, I would say it's more important to know the yield percents of your more expensive items first, or items that you're gonna have to make a huge quantity of food for people. You need to know how much you need to order. You don't wanna over order, you don't wanna under order. You'll need to be able to cost out your recipes. You don't want those costs to be inaccurate. Knowing how much you can get out of a given quantity that you may already have. Monitoring inconsistencies so that the yield percent you end up with is what you expect it to be, and you're not losing out money because certain people may not be getting the yield percents that you are expecting, maximizing your money and your profit. Well, I hope that video shed a little light on yield percents and why you should care about it. If you got something out of the video, please give us a like and subscribe.